Today, I'm gonna finally complete the Cuphead saga by 100%ing the delicious last course. This entails that I'll have to obtain all 13 achievements as well as defeat every single boss on expert mode. I'm also gonna S-rank all the bosses at the end and obtain the golden Chalice filter to truly 100% the DLC. And to spice things up even more, I'll be adding a little twist to the whole mix by spinning a wheel to decide which finger gun I use every time I face off against a new boss. Will I give up halfway because of a terrible gun to boss matchup, or will I overcome it all and go down in history as one of the greatest Cuphead players of all time? Stick around to the end to find out. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into the video. Alright, let's get this show on the road, shall we? So the first thing we need to do is talk to this clock-faced boatman to get to the new island. Blah blah blah, yes, take me to the place where much torment awaits me. We are then given a ride to the island with this creepy looking sun staring directly at us. Once we got to the island, we were met by Miss Chalice, who then offered a delicious looking cookie for us to eat. Thinking it was just a lovely gesture, Mugman bites into it and poof, he turns into a ghost, whereas Chalice is now alive again. We then follow her to this bakery where she explains that she's been trying to escape the astral plane for ages, and to do so she had this guy named Chef Saltbaker to create the cookie for her. But to everyone's surprise, the effect of the cookie wasn't permanent, and in order to bring back Chalice for good, the chef told us to gather the necessary ingredients to create a magical wonder tart, and with it she will have full control over the astral plane. Despite Chalice's attempt to have Mugman trapped in the void forever, I guess we still happily agreed to bring the ingredients back for her. But seriously, she tried to kill you, bro. How do you know she won't do it again to you with the wonder tart, huh? What can you guys possibly gain from helping this devious trick? In any case, I think it's time for the tutorial. Alright, let's check out what Miss Chalice can do. And no, I don't mean by checking her out. I just mean like, you know, to see what she can do, you know, never mind. First up, we have to now dash to parry our pink objects rather than jumping on them like before. Second, we can now dodge roll with an added bonus of invincibility when doing so. And lastly, instead of jumping once, we can now jump twice, which is gonna come in super handy later on. After I finished the tutorial, I went over to the bridge and talked to this newspaper boy who straight up called me I was a weakling. Like he even offered me a cabbage and said I was gonna need it. In all my years, I have never been so insulted by a stranger, no less, who I literally just met, that had the audacity to talk down at. I like this kid. Anyways, after talking to the super nice paperboy, I made my way to the shop to buy a new weapon to add to my collection. And now it's time to fight the first boss. Never mind, I guess we're taking the ladder from heaven instead. God, is that you? Oh wait, no, it's just some guy named the King of Games. Bit egotistical to call yourself that, don't you think? Anyways, apparently he wanted us to take part in this tournament to go up against some of the champions he had prepared for us to battle. And so I did by taking on these pawns as my first opponent. I wasn't allowed to use any of my weapon or charm against these guys, so I parried their little heads one by one and used my dodge roll to easily defeat them. But then the second champion was a bit on the trickier side to beat. I spent the first 3 rounds trying to figure out how to parry his pink mane without taking damage, which led to a fair bit of dying on my end. But on the 4th attempt, I noticed he let his guard down anytime he finished his attack animation. And by taking advantage of this, it didn't take long for the horsey to buck in defeat. Once I beat the 2 champions, the king bid me farewell for now, and then I returned to the overworld to actually fight the first boss this time. Alright, let's see what gun we'll be using against this guy. From what I know, I definitely want to try and avoid the lobber since it's said to be the worst gun in the game. Well, that's just peachy. To be honest, using this gun wasn't too bad. The damage it dealt against the giant was surprisingly decent, good enough to get me through the first and second phase fairly quickly. But when he swallowed me whole and I got to the 3rd phase, I noticed the target was right above me. And as you can see, the lobber shoots downward. Target above me, gun shoots downward. I think you get the point. Even if I got the bullets to hit, it barely even scratched him because 80% of my shots dropped down the gastric pool. I even thought about scrapping the whole wheel spinning thing because of how stuck I was at this pace. But good thing I didn't, because on my 10th attempt, I realized that I was actually making some progress. This was definitely possible. It was just really hard. One thing I did that helped immensely was to try and not get hit at the start to save as many hearts as possible. Also, since Chalice's second super art summons a shield to take 1 hit for us, I was pretty much a tank. And thanks to that, I was able to drag the fight on just enough so I can beat the dangling uvula, snag the first ingredient for the wonder tart, and an achievement for defeating a boss with Miss Chalice. My next venture had me travel east where I climbed up the ladder to face more of the king's champions. This time I was up against the bishop that bounced around like a pinball machine. To beat him, I had to blow out all the candles and parry the bishop's head every time it changed color. Its movements were hard to read initially, so I took some fat L's in the first 2 rounds. But then I got used to it later on and got the dub on my 3rd round. The next champion I had to face was a rook that had some questionable taste in women. His attacks consisted of flinging these funny looking heads and skull while the sharpening of his axe shot out sparks at me. I tried to look cool by consecutively parrying them to finish him off quickly. But of course, like any other time I tried to show off, I end up failing miserably. Good thing this game doesn't deduct points for embarrassing yourself, because once I chucked the heads at him one at a time, he wasn't so hard to beat. The last champion was a queen whose showered me with all these gemstones while a tower of lion statues switched across from one end to the other. For the statues, I just had to simply parry to easily defuse them. But to shoot these cannons at the queen while sidestepping the gemstones was a different story. I would often find myself focusing too much on not trying to get hit by these shiny objects and miss 90% of my shots fired at the tyrant. Then again, there really isn't a time limit in beating these champions, so although it took a while, I eventually shot enough cannons to defeat her, got the achievement for beating all of the king's champions, and returned to the overworld to fight my next main boss. Alright, hopefully we'll get a semi-decent loadout this time. Oh, and if you're wondering why I have 2 more guns at it, it's cause I bought the rest of them at the shop with the coins I got from beating the king's champions and getting this sneaky coin from behind the bakery. Anyways, with that said, let's see what we get. Anything but the lubber, please. Oh, thank goodness we got the roundabout. I've already used this gun on my last Cuphead video, so I knew it was a good one. But let's see how well it does against the Moonshine Mob. For this boss, the initial phase involved maneuvering around these bombs the spider summoned with a press of a button, as well as avoiding this blue ant's pesticides and an army of flies. With the roundabout's boomerang effect, the ants and the flies usually died before they could do anything to me. Not to mention the spider got absolutely demolished cause this gun packed some serious punch. Then came the second phase with the dancing firefly lady and the strips of sound waves rotating around the screen. 3 of the waves went from yellow to red that would inadvertently have me lose 1 of my heart. But thanks to Chalice's second super art, I was able to gain a shield to help me stay in the fight while also learning to evade the red strips using Chalice's dodge roll. Once I took down the ladybug, a massive anteater showed up with a snail hidden underneath its bowler hat. The snout of the anteater appeared randomly around the screen as he tried to slobber me by extending his nasty tongue out. Then he shot out this ball of scuffles that would sometimes clog up the screen with more than one. Most of the anteater's attacks were fairly easy to anticipate and I had no problem beating him. Or so I thought, as this knockout was a fake one and I lost a heart because of its deception. But thanks to the shield I put up a while ago, I was able to stay alive and actually beat him this time. After defeating the Moonshine Mob, I got the second ingredient and headed south to talk to this cactus girl, who in my opinion needed to work on her people skills because her supposed conversation starter was to scare the living daylight out of me. And I don't know about you, but that has got to be the scariest boo I've ever heard in my life. Like seriously, she almost gave me a heart attack. Okay, maybe I over exaggerated just a little bit. It was the second scariest boo I've ever heard. In any case, after hearing her out, I realized that she was talking about something very important. It was something that I probably had to decipher in order to unlock a mysterious reward that can only be used by a certain character. But I didn't think it was important at the time, so I just ignored it to fight the next boss. And what do you know, it was a plane battle, so I didn't have to worry about spinning the wheel this time. I definitely didn't spin the wheel beforehand and got the lobber again and thought I'd rather die than to use this gun, so I'm fighting this boss instead. I mean, come on, who does that? Yeah, I ended up regretting this choice later on. Anyways, back to the game. Esther Winchester, which was the name of the boss, had a lot going on for her when it came to completely annihilating her opponent. How, you may ask? Well, when you're shot with 2 bottles of snake oil, a cactus that's lassoed in, dynamites that split into more dynamites, and a flying horse that spits a ball of cactus, then I'm sure the answer to the question is pretty obvious, don't you think? And even when I somehow got through all that, she sucked in all this money for me to dodge with a vacuum cleaner and shot them out in a form of metal safes that broke into more money. After that, she gets processed into sausage links where I had to avoid all these strings of beans on top of these juicy looking steaks she spat at me. And don't even get me started on her last phase, as it involved narrowly flying through these openings in between 2 long chains of sausages, all the while evading these flaming jalapenos launched at me. Having a hard time against Esther would have been an understatement of the year, as I even thought of holding off on beating her to take on another boss. But since I was already so invested in the fight, I couldn't help but keep on going. It took me a total of 21 freaking attempts, but I finally got in the groove of fitting through the string of gaps and used my super bomb to blow her to smithereens to get that knockout. After beating Esther, I got the third ingredient to the Wonder Tart, and then I proceeded to talk to the cactus girl again to see if she had any new information to disclose. But nothing really changed from our previous conversation, so I just went on my merry way. Then I came across a graveyard where this ghost talked about how he was at the verge of solving a mystery. But because his intelligence was clearly inferior to mine, I took over the case and started trying out every combination of the order in which I had to interact with these tombstones. Man, if Einstein can see me now. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but it's more fun this way. And besides, there's only so many combinations to try. Don't ask me how long that took me. Anyways, once I solved the mystery for the ghost, I took a quick nap to see what would happen. And it turned out to be a secret boss fight, which meant I had to spin the wheel to see what gun I needed to use against them. And to my dismay, I got the spread, which was not a gun I was particularly good at using. But what was I gonna do? Spin the wheel again and use the power of editing to make sure you guys never find out? Of course not, I would never do something so disgraceful. At any rate, the damage for the spread was actually really good when I got all my bullets to hit, which could seem like the perfect gun to use against these guys, right? Wrong, cause getting close to them was the last last thing you'd want to do. Every time I faced away from the angel, he turned into a devil to shoot fireballs along with a pillar of flame zooming across me. And this cloud with the lightning swaying back and forth didn't make it any easier. I tried standing on the cloud to see if that was the best position to be at, but I was missing a lot of my shots while moving side to side, so I scrapped that plan. Then I tried camping at the edge to see if that worked, but I kept falling off when the fireball got close, so that was no good either. Then I decided to wing it just like I do with everything in my life, and funny enough, it actually worked out just fine. And I turned out just fine too. At least that's what my parents told me. Anyways, after beating the angel and the devil, I got the achievement for defeating them and I got myself a cursed relic. Now we'll be using this relic to unlock a secret achievement down the road, but since we still have a lot to do, I'll spare you the details for now. In the meantime, let's beat up the next boss. And what better way to do that than to get a gun I had never used before? Oh no, what if this is even worse than the lobber? I guess there's only one way to find out. And finding out I did, as this finger gun wasn't too bad, but it wasn't great either. To deal the maximum amount of damage, I had to press the aim button for the bullets to come closer together. But I wasn't the best when it came to aim, so I forgot to press it most of the time. Still, I did pretty well for the first two phases even with the half decent gun. Up until I got to the final phase where the screen literally flipped sideways. Like, I kid you not, this part of the boss fight had my brain go through multiple aneurysms that resulted in so many failures. The only thing I could literally do here was jump up and down and dodge the red balls. But even when I did that, the yellow ones would sometimes overlap with it to create an inescapable attack. The only way I could get past this phase was to pray the balls didn't overlap as much. And with enough attempts, I luckily had a round where they didn't overlap at all, which led to a flawless win against the furry mongrels and got myself the fourth ingredient. Alright, here we go. One last boss to obtain the final ingredient. Ooh, I got the charge. I'm actually pretty satisfied with this one. I say that because I've used the gun before and I'm not gonna lie, it was an absolute fire of a gun. Like literally fire. And look who we were up against next. Poor Mortimer Freeze pulled the short end of the straw as anything he threw at me got absolutely incinerated. Even his abominable snow friend didn't stand a chance against this heat. But then when I got to the last phase, my weapon wasn't so hot anymore. The icy flake had an arsenal of attacks that took me by surprise countless times throughout my scrimmage against him. The worst one being his eyeball popping right out of his socket that created a vertical laser attack, which had me lose a heart every single time. Nonetheless, with a little bit of luck, I eventually beat him with a sliver of health, got myself the fifth and final ingredient, and the achievement for beating all 5 of the DLC bosses. Finally, now that we have all the ingredients, we just have to get them to the chef? Oh, I'm sure it's just getting the recipe ready and never mind his evil. This whole time the chef has been plotting to create the Wonder Tart for himself to use it for his own selfish gains. And it seems like the most important ingredient was a living soul, where he had Mugman trapped in the glass dome. Also, how in the world did he capture him when he was literally with us the entire time? Whatever, before we take on the chef, let's spin the wheel first. Okay, wheel, don't fail me now. I need the best possible gun for this last boss fight. No. Oh my goodness, that was so close. Although, I'm not so sure about this one either. You know what? So long as it isn't the lobber, I'm sure we'll be fine. It was basically the lobber, but the bullets went out. And you know what that means. I had to aim with the gosh darn thing. And I'm sure you all know by now I wasn't a fan of that. But that wasn't enough to stop a guy like me from rising to the occasion. And with the power of repetition, my aim actually drastically improved to the point where I was dishing out a ton of damage. Then the chef proceeded to introduce me to his pepper shakers that just couldn't stop themselves from sneezing. I wonder why. Anyways, other than the fact this little fire thing was being a pest, getting through this part wasn't too hard. And then we find ourselves in a wasteland with 2 spiraling salt dancers bouncing up and down to crush me. But of course, I didn't let that happen by being an absolute dodge rolling maniac. And then came the final phase where the difficulty actually bumped up quite a bit. The only way I could damage the floating pink heart was either to get up close and personal or open fire from the bottom. Aiming with a twist up was beyond me at this point because it took all I had just to not fall from the platforms, which led this fight to come down to how long I can keep all this up. But my human limitations had me slowly make mistakes one after the other where I was whittled down to 1 heart. I used my last remaining super meter to create 1 final heart shield in hopes of staying alive just a bit longer. And surely enough, my efforts had paid off as moments after doing so, I was able to finally take down the chef and got the achievement for completing the quest for this island. After defeating Chef Saltbaker, we released Mugman from his glass confinement, with Chalice going back to being a ghost. Then the building started to shake, where we all hightailed out of the place along with the chef. With the bakery destroyed, there was no way for Chalice to come back to life again. But she goes on to say it isn't worth sacrificing someone else's soul to bring her back, and vows to find another way to escape the astral plane. In the meantime, she offers to help us if we ever need it, and goes on to say she's just happy she now has 2 new buddies to keep her company. The end. Alright, all we need to do now is obtain the remaining achievements and get an S rank for all the DLC bosses. Kill me now. Anyways, I checked to see what achievements I had left to do and saw that there were a few of them I could finish off fairly quickly. So I did just that by going back to the first Cuphead Island to defeat 4 more bosses and also used Chalice's first super art on one of them to nab the Decadent and the Golden Touch achievement. Oh, and I fought them all on simple mode because the difficulty level had no relevance in obtaining the 2 achievements. Don't ask why, you would have done the same. Next up was the King's Admiration achievement, where I had to go back to the floating castle to take on this guy's final challenge called the Gauntlet. I basically had to win against all the King's champions again, but this time I had to beat them back to back without dying even once. But despite the pressure that came with needing to beat all of them consecutively, I already had a pretty good handle on every one of their attacks. So yeah, it didn't take too long to get this one done. After that, I went for the High Hat achievement, which involved beating a DLC boss without killing a single minion. And since I was an absolute maniac, I beat all the bosses again to check which one had the least minions. And actually, I just googled it and saw this one comment say Mortimer freeze, so yeah, I just picked him. And what do you know, it worked out perfectly, as the icicles and popsicles were the only minions Mortimer had in his disposal. Also, just like the Decadent and the Golden Touch achievement, this one didn't require you to beat it on a certain difficulty level, so I went with the good old simple mode. Again, you would have done the same. Once I finished getting all the easier ones out of the way, there remained 4 that I intentionally left out, and for good reason too. You see, the Ranger achievement requires you to earn an A- or higher on all the DLC bosses, and the Cook to Perfection achievement was similar, except you only need to get an S for one boss. And since I was gonna S rank all the DLC bosses anyways, it only made sense to leave them both for last. Now, S ranking a boss is by no means an easy task, and knowing that it was gonna take everything I had in me to get them meant it was time to ditch the wheel and tackle each boss with the most powerful gun in the game, the Crack Shot. The reason why this finger gun was the best was because I didn't have to aim with it, and once my brain was freed from this accursed handicap called aiming, my gaming sense went through the roof, to the point where I could literally play with my feet. Okay, maybe that's pushing it, but my gameplay did improve significantly. So with this immense confidence boost, I took the Crack Shot for a spin against Glomstone the Giant, and I gotta say, I was busting out moves I could never have dreamed of pulling off if I used the other gun. Like, even when I got to the last phase where I had such a hard time with the lobber, I was able to cheese it with this new finger gun. And I don't think it's even worth telling you how it went down with the rest of the boss fights, as I surprisingly went through each of them fairly quickly without even breaking a sweat. And it was all thanks to the Crack Shot, as it literally made me go Super Saiyan. Except Esther Winchester. She took a lot longer to beat because I couldn't use the Crack Shot against her. 2 hours to be exact. But other than that, I got all the S ranks pretty easily. And then there was one last achievement that was standing between me and 100%ing this game. And it was called the Paladin, which was the secret achievement I mentioned back when I turned my broken relic to the cursed relic. And in order to get it, I needed to use the cursed relic to beat all the DLC bosses again on regular mode. And since I have already beat them all on expert mode, this should be a piece of cake, right? Well, not exactly. You see, equipping the cursed relic reduces your HP to 1, and your weapons are randomized every time you dash or take your finger off the shoot button. And since it was also a charm, I had to switch it with the Astro Cookie, which meant no more double jumps and dodge rolls for me. Trying to beat the 6 bosses again with the cursed relic was an absolute nightmare. I even thought of quitting halfway because of how impossible it was not to take a single hit by any of their attacks. But then I discovered something that became my saving grace. Just as the cursed relic changes the weapons at random, it did the same for the charms as well. So every time I pulled off a parry, I had a chance to randomly gain a heart using the heart ring charm. And that's when I had the genius idea of proccing as many of these as possible in all of the beginning stages of my battles. And what do you know, all my boss fights weren't so difficult anymore. All but Chef Saltbaker, that is. The reason I had such a hard time with him was because even with my plan to stack the hearts, I kept losing them to his insurmountable cascade of attacks in the first phase. And even when I got past them somehow, his second phase was still equally hard to overcome. I kept trying and trying, but there just seemed to be no way through this obstacle that stood before me. Was this the end of the road? Were all my efforts up till now for nothing? Doubts began to pour in, and I started to think that 100% in this game was a mere pipe dream that was never gonna come to fruition. Just then, I began having flashbacks of all the trials and tribulations I had to go through in order to get to this point. And that's when it hit me. This was no different than any of the challenges I've gone through before. It was just another wall I had to break through. A mountain I just had to overcome. And once I had regained my confidence from giving myself that motivational pep talk, I began to see a drastic improvement in my gameplay where I was able to finally get past the first 2 phases. Then I capitalized on this opportunity by gunning down the dancing salt figures and carefully maneuvered around it. And doing so got me through the 3rd phase as well, leaving me with just one more phase to beat to finish the entire game. I used my super art to survive the initial few moments as I shuffled through my guns to find the Crack Shot. Then once I got it, I did everything I could to keep myself from dying to the floating heart and falling off the moving platform. Jump after jump, it seemed like it was never gonna end. But as soon as I saw myself gain an extra heart from this parry, my victory was assured, as moments after that, I was able to finally defeat the Salty Baker and unlock the Paladin achievement to 100% the delicious last course. And so with the completion of the DLC, I now had the glorious bragging rights to a 300%ed game. For those of you who are wondering if I finished the Cactus Girls quest to get the Golden Chalice, well, I did. But not without beating all the original bosses in the first Cuphead game in simple mode. And I'm pretty sure you guys wouldn't want to watch me do that for another 20 minutes. So instead, I'll just show you the skin I got from it. Also, if you haven't watched the first and second part of this series, you should probably do that by clicking on the link below. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed playing. Be sure to like the video to support it and subscribe to to the channel so you don't miss out on all the cool content I have planned for the future. While you do that, I'm just gonna admire all my hard-earned achievements, and I will see you all in the next one.